Jamie the Iceman Stevenson wasn't just part of Scotland's underworld, he ruled it. Cold, calculating and ruthless, he built a global drug empire on fear, violence and greed. Driven by ego and enforced with brutality, Stevenson became one of the most prolific drug traffickers Scotland has ever seen. His influence stretched far beyond Glasgow, spanning continents and flooding the UK with deadly narcotics. On day 4 of his trial, he finally admitted guilt, exposing the scale of his criminal network. The collapse of his empire revealed not just one man's crimes, but an international operation built on devastation. Stevenson wasn't a dealer, he was a kingpin, and for years, he sat at the top of organized crime. Jamie Stevenson grew up in the shadow of Glasgow's Red Road flats, a swaggering teenage thug who quickly earned a reputation for violence on streets already bracing for the incoming heroin epidemic. By the early 1980s, his name was being whispered across the north side, especially after a savage knife attack at a petrol station caught the attention of serious underworld players. Among them were the McGovern clan, run by feared brothers Tommy and Tony. Stevenson grew especially close to Tony, forging a bond that was more brotherhood than business. He became a trusted enforcer and courier, running drugs down to Liverpool. But these runs served another purpose, helping Stevenson quietly build his own network beyond Glasgow. Eventually that loyalty unraveled. A bitter fallout with Tony McGovern would set the pair on dramatically different and deadly paths. Back then, Glasgow's criminal scene was ruled by Arthur Thompson, the original Godfather. With ties to the Cray twins and a fearsome legacy dating back to the 1950s, Thompson loomed large over a city plagued by poverty, drugs, and gang warfare. His chosen heir, Paul Ferris, enjoyed his own notoriety, but high-profile trials and prison time derailed any ambitions of replacing the king. After Thompson's death in 1993, Tam the licensee McGraw made a bid for the top spot, but whispers of him being a police informant kept him from ever claiming true underworld authority. Instead, the real power shift was happening in the shadows. Away from the media spotlight, ambitious mobs like the Daniels and Lyons were waging bloody turf wars in the north, carving out empires through stabbings, shootings, and street-level terror. In this brutal shifting landscape, Jamie Stevenson was quietly climbing and building something far bigger than anyone could see. Jamie Iceman Stevenson cut his teeth as an enforcer for the feared McGovern clan. He rose through the ranks as the mob grew in power in the 1990s to become one of Glasgow's most feared drug-dealing operations. Jamie Stevenson was deeply embedded within their ranks, forging close ties with the brothers at the helm. His rise was swift. By 1992, he was the best man at Kingpin Tony McGovern's wedding. 6 years later, McGovern returned the favor at Stevenson's own ceremony. The bond seemed unbreakable, but alliances in the underworld rarely last. A bitter fallout turned Stevenson from trusted ally to marked man. What followed was a brutal campaign of tit-for-tat violence, including a failed assassination attempt on Stevenson himself. The McGoverns reportedly hired feared hitman Robert Bomber O'Hara to take him out, but in a shocking twist, Stevenson and O'Hara joined forces instead. Then came the killing that sent shockwaves through the city. On September 16, 2000, Tony McGovern was gunned down in his car outside the Morven pub, wearing a bulletproof vest that offered no protection. No one was ever convicted, but all eyes turned to one man, Stevenson. He was the prime and only suspect. But with witnesses too scared to speak, justice never came. In the late 90s, the media began lifting the lid on Scotland's hidden crime empires. Stevenson was already a key player, and by the time of McGovern's murder, he was becoming a force of his own. The chaos that followed only solidified his fearsome reputation. In 2007, Stevenson finally faced justice, but not for the crime most believed he committed. Instead, he was convicted of money laundering. Drug charges were dropped in a controversial plea deal. The court still recognized the vast scale of his empire, handing down a substantial sentence tied to a global narcotics network. Once released, Stevenson wasted no time returning to the game. He formed a powerful alliance with James and Barry Gillespie, masterminding a global drug smuggling operation that stretched from Scotland to South America. Sources say the trio split power 50-50, flooding the UK with drugs through an international network. At the peak of their power, Jamie Stevenson and James Gillespie stood as equals, joint architects of a sprawling criminal empire stretching from Scotland to South America. As co-bosses, they ran a tight strategic operation, trafficking drugs, weapons, and laundering millions with ruthless precision. To expand their reach, fellow criminal James the Don White was sent to Brazil as their man on the ground. It was a strategic move born out of desperation. By then, the Gillespie brothers were under relentless scrutiny, linked to multiple murders and accused of masterminding cross-border trafficking. As pressure from law enforcement mounted, the heat became unbearable. With nowhere left to hide in plain sight, they disappeared into the shadows. Stevenson dealt only with the Gillespies or their closest kin. His link to White was strictly through James Gillespie, keeping the chain of command tight and secure. While Stevenson lived near Gillespie, the empire thrived. Every shipment was split down the middle, each boss running his own vast, disciplined distribution network. Even prison couldn't slow them down. When one was inside, the other took over operations seamlessly. Jamie Stevenson walked out of prison in 2013 and straight back into the only life he knew: crime. Within years, he had transformed into a globe-trotting kingpin at the helm of a booming international drug empire. By 2019, his network spanned continents, with close ties to notorious South American drug cartels, creating a direct pipeline from countries like Brazil, Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador to Europe and the UK. He was living large in hotspots like Dubai, Spain, and the ultra-exclusive Nurai Island off Abu Dhabi, a millionaire gangster cloaked in luxury. Rolexes, designer goods, and five-star hideouts weren't just indulgences. They were tools to launder dirty money and flaunt his untouchable status. Stevenson wasn't just back in the game, he was ruling it. By now, Stevenson's reputation and infamy in Scotland's underworld was such that he was even compared to Tony Soprano, the famous mafia boss from the hit TV show The Sopranos. Among those drawn to Brazil were notorious Scottish gangsters, including James the Don White and the Gillespie brothers, James and Barry. White and his gang oversaw massive shipments of cocaine arriving in Europe from Ecuador. James White had already been convicted for his part in an earlier smuggling operation that hid narcotics inside solar panels. During the trial, it came to light that he had served as a lieutenant in a powerful criminal network led by the infamous Scottish fugitives, James and Barry Gillespie, who vanished without trace in 2019. After the mysterious disappearance of his former bosses, White swiftly rose to become the head of one of Scotland's most notorious criminal mobs. The last confirmed sighting of the Gillespie brothers was in Brazil, the very same country where James the Don White was eventually arrested by Brazilian authorities. Living the high life in the coastal city of Fortaleza, White's playboy lifestyle came crashing down when he was hauled back to Scotland to face trial. In 2023, he was jailed for masterminding a major drug importation scheme. During the court proceedings, it emerged that White had told his contacts back home that with the Gillespie brothers missing, he planned to seize control of their sprawling criminal empire. In effect, White had stepped into the void, assuming leadership of one of Scotland's most dangerous gangs. As for the Gillespie brothers themselves, their fate remains shrouded in mystery. Police Scotland suspects they may have been killed and have even shared their fears with the Gillespie family. Yet independent investigations and direct contact with Brazilian authorities reveal no official knowledge of their deaths, leaving open the chilling possibility that the brothers are still alive and in hiding. Until definitive proof surfaces, whether the discovery of their bodies or confirmation of their whereabouts, their disappearance remains one of the darkest unanswered questions in the UK's criminal underworld. In early 2020, everything seemed to be falling into place for Jamie Stevenson as he began plotting his most daring scheme yet. But the world was on the brink of upheaval. The COVID-19 pandemic was about to strike, plunging everything into chaos. Just a month before the lockdown in March, Stevenson finalized a deal to smuggle a ton of cocaine from Ecuador to the UK. He met with David Bilsland to map out a plan that would use a Glasgow fruit market business as a cover. What neither Stevenson nor Bilsland realized was that they were already under surveillance. The police uncovered Stevenson's role in the sprawling criminal operation almost by chance. In 2019, a tip-off led investigators to David Bilsland, a man with no prior criminal record, who soon drew their attention. Scrutinizing Bilsland's fruit business in Glasgow, officers noticed suspicious travel patterns. In February 2020, he took an unusual one-day trip to Alicante, Spain, without any luggage, raising red flags. Scottish authorities quickly reached out to their counterparts in Spain, requesting surveillance on Bilsland during his visit. Spanish police tailed him to a hotel in Alicante, where he was seen meeting a man for coffee. Though the officers didn't recognize the visitor, they photographed the encounter and sent the images back to Scotland. The response from the Scottish police was swift. The moment the photo arrived, they identified the man sitting opposite Bilsland, none other than Jamie Stevenson. His unexpected presence stunned investigators and immediately intensified the investigation. At that stage, authorities still had only a vague idea of how deeply involved Bilsland was. Later in court, it emerged that Bilsland himself may not have fully understood the gravity of the situation at first. He claimed that once he realized who he was dealing with, he felt too intimidated to back out, a reaction that, given Stevenson's fearsome reputation, was perhaps all too understandable. But then everything came crashing down. In June 2020, Jamie Stevenson was arrested alongside his stepson Gerard Carbin and trusted sidekick Paul Bowes for their role in flooding the streets with Valium. Intelligence led officers to the Sherbrooke Hotel in Glasgow's south side, where Stevenson was meeting associates around a picnic table. As plainclothes officers closed in, Stevenson spotted them and, mistaking them for hitmen, panicked. Convinced his life was under threat, he bolted, tumbling down a steep embankment and ending up in a crumpled heap. Only when the officers identified themselves did Stevenson realize he wasn't under attack, he was being arrested. In his desperate flight, he left behind a critical piece of evidence, his EncroChat phone. That abandoned device proved pivotal. Investigators unlocked encrypted messages sent under the aliases Elusive Ale and Big Tasty, confirming that beyond doubt, Stevenson was masterminding a vast international drug trafficking network. Stevenson and his crew had established a pill factory in Kent, churning out 250,000 tablets an hour, worth an estimated £14 million. Following the raid, 28 million Atazolam street Valium tablets were seized. Then, in September, authorities uncovered a ton of cocaine hidden in a shipment at the port of Dover. Known for his stocky build and a distinctive scar on the left side of his face, Stevenson was also wanted in connection with 2 suspected arson attacks on properties in Lanarkshire and Forth Valley in May 2020. The takedown of the encrypted EncroChat network was the first death knell for Jamie Iceman Stevenson's empire, and dealt a crippling blow to hundreds of other criminals across Scotland, the UK, and Europe. The 2020 joint operation by Dutch and French forces swept up millions of incriminating messages, which were passed on to Britain's National Crime Agency. This led to the launch of Operation Vanetic, a landmark crackdown on organised crime. It was the damning messages between Jamie Stevenson and Lloyd Cross that ultimately sealed their fate. Lloyd Cross, and it's in bananas. Jamie Stevenson, that fruit job is the prize. That's life-changing work. A fruit market tucked away in a Glasgow industrial estate, far from the sun-soaked shores of Brazil, was the unlikely front for a $100 million cocaine shipment destined to flood the UK. Stevenson orchestrated 17 legitimate banana shipments as decoys, testing the waters in case the police were onto him. But the final delivery was different, a ton of cocaine hidden among the fruit boxes. Unbeknownst to Stevenson, the National Crime Agency was watching. In September 2020, they intercepted the massive drug haul at the port of Dover, while simultaneously raiding the fruit market back in Glasgow. Incredibly, despite the overwhelming evidence, Stevenson was released on bail by English authorities and vanished to Spain, slipping off the radar. Few would have expected bail for an organised crime figure of his notoriety, especially fresh from a major prison sentence and in the midst of running a massive pill factory. How the decision was made remains a baffling mystery. By January 2022, the National Crime Agency named Stevenson as one of the UK's 12 most wanted criminals across Europe. Just 2 weeks later, a joint operation between the NCA, Police Scotland, and Dutch National Police brought him back into custody. Police received the tip that Jamie Stevenson was hiding in the Netherlands. Dutch authorities tracked him down and arrested him during a jog, alongside fellow fugitive Dean Ferguson. Their time on the run ended abruptly when they were extradited to Scotland. Stevenson's trial began in August 2024, but was cut short after a string of guilty pleas. Co-accused Lloyd Cross admitted to the cocaine smuggling plot, followed by Jerry Carbin and Ryan McPhee, who pleaded guilty to running a street Valium factory. As his gang turned on him, Stevenson clashed with his stepson Gerard Carbin before ultimately pleading guilty himself, along with Paul Bowes and David Bilsland. Jamie Iceman Stevenson, Scotland's top drug kingpin, was sentenced to 20 years for orchestrating a £100 million cocaine operation. Though behind bars, his influence remains strong, with much of his criminal network, legal advisors, accountants, and enablers still untouched. While justice was served, dismantling the full criminal ecosystem is far from over. That was it for today's video. What are your thoughts on today's topic? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see our next videos.